Probably worth. All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. A little short of breath. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Independent Transportation Surtax Oversight Board, July 25th, 2019. We're going to start with a presentation from Lenny, Mobility Advancement Program Metrics. It's your floor.
There we go. Good morning. So at one of the prior meetings, we were asked to put together some data on what sort of percentages we were using and the overall expenses by fiscal year. And so, gosh, it's not very easy to read, actually. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Not even there, but at any rate, so what we created was a dashboard that will show you the operating expenses for fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 2020. So you see 57 million and 8 million. And then it has the capital expenses and the operating expenses on these two sides. And then down here it shows you the percentage that each group was of capital expenses by fiscal year for 2019. There's the ability to sort of change out which way you see it, so I can, you can just look at it here. I don't know if you want to go into each and every one of them, but I think the idea here is whether or not this is the type of information you were looking for. So here you can see it broken out, capital expenses for fiscal year 2019. There's transit and public works, and you can see the total and the percent of the total that was public works, and then the total for transit and the percent of the total that was transit. And then here we have 2020, and I'll just make them big because it seems to be pretty hard to read from there. Here we have transit in blue, public works again in yellow. Now we're adding map admin, and that's let's see if I can get this little, yes.
Can you differentiate between public works and transit?
Public works are like the sidewalks and the street lights and the road work, and transit is the buses, possibly the bus shelters, the equipment that they might put on the buses, like Wi-Fi, that sort of thing. So those, generally Chris will go over the part of the presentation that's the transit part, the enhanced service, the additional routes, the new buses that they're buying, that sort of thing. And they break them down by operating, which is the money that they pay for running the bus routes, and then capital, which is the equipment and supplies and such that they need in order to run that. Is that good? So this is just a way that we can show it to you. And here you see map admin, 1.9 million, 2.4% for year 2020. And then if we just make this one bigger, this is again operating expenses. This was 19. So you see map admin at 2.7 million or 34%, public works at 1.5 or 18.95%, transit at 3.7 million or 47%. And then you can go over here and see the same thing for 20. So you can, the big chart, you can sort of compare them side by side. Like I said, I wish you could read it a little bit better, but then we can just zoom in.
Just to clear here, when you're talking about expenditures, these are allocations, these are budgets, right?
These are not actual expenses yet, right? Correct.
So
these are just
I think to clarify that when you're talking about expenses here, these are just the allocations or the budgets that we have approved.
Those are the the 2020 stuff that you're looking at approving today, and the 2019 is the stuff that was approved at a prior meeting. Yes, sir.
Lenny, why is the administration so large on the lower left?
So the reason why it looks big here is that this was when we were first standing it up, and we were allocating money for some of the office space and all of the equipment, as well as beginning to allocate the salaries for people that have not yet been hired necessarily, but that needed to be set up to begin the program.
And that year is 2020 or 19 and 20?
So on the left here, this is 2019 on this bottom left. So if you want to compare operating to operating year by year, it's these two. So this is the 2020 proportions. The 2019 proportions here on your left, and these are the 2020 proportions here on your right. You're welcome. And then there's a sort of, lots of different ways we can show it to you. And then if you use these dashboards, you can just sort of, scroll back and forth between years. So you can look at 2019 if I click this button, and then 2020 if we click this button. And then you can just turn off various programs so that you can see them however you would like to compare them. So this was, I guess what I'm trying to find out here is if this is a format that makes sense to you and it's the kind of information that you asked for, and whether or not it's missing anything that was requested.
Lenny, I had a question. Do you
Yes.
have a graph a pie chart that shows capital investments versus operating expenses on an annual basis projected?
Right, so if you look here, this is capital on the left. So if you wanted to compare this one and this one, that would be, I hope, what you're looking for. So this is in green here on this side is FY19's capital expenses, which is 52 million. And this was, in blue is FY2020's proposed capital expenses of 83 million. And then on the right, this is operating. So this is the operating side, and operating was 8 million in FY19 and is proposed to be 57 million in 2020.
So I guess just maybe for the benefit of the public to have a pie chart that shows just the relative, when you look at the overall expenditures, how much of it is operating expenses, how much of it is capital in any given year.
Gotcha, so combine the two together basically. Okay, all right. Anything else that's missing or that you were looking for that you're not seeing here? Hopefully between this and the prototype dashboard we showed you last time that had the map and the different pieces, we're just looking to standardize how we provide information to you going forward so that we can, if you're happy with the data that's here, we'll obviously make it look much nicer and put a lot more time into it. But I just wanted to throw together this prototype just to make sure it was capturing the character of data and presenting it in a way that makes sense to you. Is that? Yes,
Call
ma'am.
me 30%, but that is always a concern for me, how we're tracking our, advances in meeting those goals.
So I think that those projects haven't necessarily been let yet, and as Mr. Allen alluded to, these are just the budgeted requests, and then the projects have to be then, procured, and at that time is when you identify what firm is doing it, and whether or not they're a local firm, and whether or not the 30%. And my understanding is that since we don't have that data for you yet, it's not here, but that we will be tracking that data, and there will be yet another dashboard, which I can't even prototype yet because we don't necessarily have the projects let, but there will be another dashboard that will show you of the things you've approved, like if you approved 57 million in operating, this is how much we actually spent, and then this is the proportion that was part of the 30% or not part of the 30%. So that you will get a third, so there's like 3 sets of data, right? So you'll get that as the third set. This is the second set, which I think was requested at the last meeting. And then at the last meeting, we showed you the first set, which is sort of that map that gave you an idea of where the projects you were approving were located and what a sort of summary of those projects was. So we were thinking between those 3 that we might be able to standardize the way that we show you the data. And then this is a software called PowerBI, which is Power of Business Intelligence, and it's something that the industry is sort of standardizing around. And this can pull in information from lots of different sources. And the idea would be that it would be updated in real time, and that you could sort of have these radio buttons to play with it. And we would do, if you're happy with this format, and again, I'll make it look better, we would anticipate providing the 30% you're talking about in a similar type of format. So you'll be able to actually drill down and push some buttons and play with the data a little bit. And even in this, just so you know, so you won't see it just this one way. So you can look at it like this. You can look at it with just these. So you'll get kind of the same data, but in a bunch of different ways, so that you can look at it however makes most sense to you, if you'd rather see the bar graphs or the pie charts. So, the idea is we'd create this dashboard and then you can play with it.
Will you be,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Will this be done by projects or by cities, municipalities?
So right now, this is just overall map budgeting. So this is basically the entire amount that Public Works, which is county projects, is spending, and Transit, which is county transit, is spending, and then county map admin. And then once we get data from the cities, you'll start to see the breakdown of what, like when the MPO prioritizes the projects, how many city projects have been approved, how much money they're spending, and then when you sort of move over these pie charts, you can start to see like a little bit more data about them. So if what you're saying is you'd like to be able to scroll over and just get like a quick summary of which cities have those projects, that's certainly something we could do.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Will you be able to cue the system to compare the original approved projects under the ordinance and modifications to those as we go through the years?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, we can do that. One of the things that I would ask then is that I can sort of prototype that out once we start to make those changes, and just let me know if it makes sense to you. And because ultimately, what I'd like to do is create a standard and then maintain it that way, so that it's not constantly changing for you and making it confusing as well. So we can go back and make apples to apples comparisons. So my goal would be that, as you get a chance to play with everything, we'll certainly tweak it as we go, but at some point I'd like to say, okay, this is how we're going to continue to present data from here forward, if that makes sense.
Does the system allow you to have a separate file that you're inputting and updating versus a live file which is current as of a certain date?
So
I worry that the system, since it's going to be online and available, I would guess through the internet, for people to queue those types of inquiries, that you're in the process of updating it and it's not current to the file that's already out there.
It is possible to do that. So if you look at this particular list over here on your right, you'll see all of the different files that make up the data that you're seeing here. So it's certainly possible to use like a quarterly updated version of the file on the web. On the back end, I think we do want to have a real-time version that uses APIs to go and get the data, just so that we can continually track our progress at any moment. But it's certainly possible, if that's the desire of the board, to just make it so that there's like a quarterly or a monthly version that gets put here in the list of things that this dashboard pulls from.
Okay, are there any more questions? Is that all you have?
This is it. If I don't know if you want to give me any feedback, or whether or not this looks like what you asked for, and if anything else is missing, and if you're good with this, then I will take this beyond the prototype stage and make it look a little bit better, and we'll be able to, as we request new projects or whatever, you'll be able to see it evolve.
And make the print a little larger.
Yes, I agree with you. It looks much better on the computers in the office than it does up there. This is true. So yes, we will fix that.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate
Great.
that.
Thank you, Lenny. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right. So I don't know if...
So will we move into the next line item? That's the end of the presentation, correct?
yes.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to take a roll call. How do we want to do that? You want me to take it, or? Sure. Okay. George Cavros.
Here.
Shay Smith.
Present.
Consuelo Kelly. Here. Cynthia Chambers.
Here.
Doug Kuhlman. Here. Phil Allen. Here. Allison Love. Anthea Pennant.
Here.
Okay, Alan Hooper here. I'm chair and secretary. Okay, so the next item is public participation. I'd like to ask if anybody in the public or in the audience would like to speak. Come on up.
My name is Clifton Easerman. My address is 4135 Northwest 67th Way in Coral Springs, Florida. So I'm here not representing anybody. I actually own a small business in the Wilton Manors, Oakland Park area for 21 years. In my travels, I've been exposed to different types of transportation concepts in other countries, and I'd like to share two of them with you. And this may not be the right committee to do this for. So the first one is a LED based solar panel reflection system that basically is more derived towards low lit or no lit areas. Also for areas that have a history of high impacts of pedestrians as well as accidents in traffic situations. The LED lights increase the visibilities. Because the LED lights are based on solar, it's not a reflection like the current cat's eye systems are. So the reflective visibility of the system is not based upon someone's maintenance of their own headlight systems. It also increases the visibility during rain, fog, and significantly, of course, the benefit is during blackout periods after a hurricane knocks out all of our electric systems for seven days or weeks. I went through Wilma, so I understand that. But the biggest advantage is that it increases the visibility. It does, in the areas that have implemented this, it has decreased the accident rates as long as pedestrian being hit. So it has lowered the insurance rates for the areas that have implemented this. I would ask the committee if you would consider not implementing it in maybe 2 or 3 areas that have a history in the county in order to, in effect, try to lower lower the pedestrian impacts. I know we have a problem in the Wilton Manors Oakland Park area, as there have been about 6 or 7 deaths through pedestrian being hit, and also in some of the areas in Pembroke Pines and also Coral Springs. The big thing is that this is not new technology. Internationally, they're on somewhere around the 7th to 15th generation, so we're not starting from scratch. We also have it here locally in the Turtle Run area, in the turnabout, if anyone is familiar with the Turtle Run, and that area has not seen any type of accidents or pedestrians being hit or anything of that nature, so there is a frame of precedence there. And I know I'm only supposed to speak for 2 minutes. I do have another, so unless the committee says no, I'll end there unless you want the other idea.
Go ahead.
The other one is considered the microtransit systems. The microtransit system is basically an on-demand public sector system. It's been implemented not only in Washington, D.C., Arlington, Texas, and also in New York City, but it's basically an on-demand bus that basically adds benefit to those who are traveling on the train. Many people don't like to take the train because once you get to the train station, what are you supposed to do? So this on-demand public transit system is basically either by telephone, and it's in coordination with the train systems. Once the train arrives, people can get on the microtransit system, which is about a 9-seater bus, and use their smartphone or a pass that has been given in order to transport them from the train system down to places of business. So you can go from the train system to the beach, train system to downtown or a specific locality. It does not compete with the Lyft and Uber drivers because these transit systems are geographically bound. So they may only have one for the downtown area or Fort Lauderdale at large. There may be one for the Wilton Manors, Oakland Park. So they do not cross geographic boundaries. So they do not compete with the taxis, and they also do not compete against the buses because the buses are fixed in their routes. The expense of this can be offset by having, if anyone works downtown Fort Lauderdale, you know that parking is an expense, and we also know that a lot of the the private sectors have to buy parking spaces and actually pay some of their employees to not come in with vehicles. This is a way to help the private sector in the downtown areas in order to get their employees not only off the streets with their cars, but also to free up parking spaces for clients and customers. This also will have an impact on facilitating movement from the Miami area and West Palm Beach areas to the downtown area of Fort Lauderdale, maybe even the airport area, by having a systematic on-demand public transportation system. And for lower income, you could also use public sector money in order to offset the cost, which tends to be about $4 in other places that have gone. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I would say that this is an appropriate place for you to speak on.
Okay.
We are an extension of the public,
Okay.
so we represent you. That's the way I see it. And the staff here, you have professionals that do this on a daily basis, so we love to hear from the people that are within the city that have stuff, or the county that have ideas and things to bring to the table. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, you might want to introduce him to both Tony and Chris.
Chris? Yeah, thank you. Okay. So we're going to move to our discussion items. We have our project detail spreadsheet. I do want to say I went through the I think all of us had a meeting with the staff, which was very informative. I did go through the backup material. There are some items, and I'll tell staff that I would like to hear more about. So I will point those out when it's appropriate. And if anybody else went through the material and have anything that they want to bring up, or items that are important, or things that clarifications. But I do appreciate the staff's job in putting the scope of work, the objectives and goals, a description of the projects, the locations, the cost. I really appreciate the work that staff did. It gives a lot of clarification to the line items that we're trying to approve for the budget. There was even, as you can see, there's arrows that either move. You'll see some that go up and down that say whether or not the budget has changed. So with that, I'll let staff take over. But again, thank you very much for your work. I appreciate that.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to introduce you all again to, and the public, to Althea Lewis, who actually worked on the spreadsheet and created it. And thanks to everyone who worked very hard over a 2-week period of time to get pictures and narratives of each of these projects together for you. I just wanted to kind of set the stage, especially for the public that might be watching who did not have the briefings that you all had. A summary of, and this was something that you all asked for during the workshop that we did in June, making sure that you have clarification of which projects are new, which projects were in the plan, what the original financial plan for FY20 was versus what we're doing. So I want to provide you with that overview for the record. The county anticipated receiving $357 million in surtax revenues for FY20. That's the entire calendar year, actually. The forecast appears consistent. Only $339.5 million is actually budgeted. And the reason for that is law requires us to hold back 5% of the revenues. So at a $339.5 million total, we have $137.4 million. Thanks, Lenny. Appreciate it. So I added it. Actually, if you slide all the way over, Lenny, and you come down a little bit, then everybody can see what I'm actually reading. There it is. Okay. $137.4 million was in the financial plan that went to the voters, that was approved by the Board of County Commissioners and audited by the state. And that was for municipal projects. So I just want, again, to clarify that there are no municipal projects on the spreadsheet and before you today for approval, because they're coming back to you in the spring after the MPO has completed their prioritization process as per our interlocal agreement. So we have made sure that $137.4 million is reserved for municipal project prioritization and the community shuttle program. The county is requesting a total of $146,288,731. You can see that right next to the narrative to the left. And that means that $55.8 million is actually moving forward for future projects that we know will require that funding later in the program. And with that, I'm going to actually ask Tony Huey. Lenny, if you could scroll all the way back up. We're going to go through the public works projects, and he's going to take you through oh, lovely, okay. All right. Musical chairs, I'm sorry, the table only has so many seats and microphones at it. So Tony is going to take you through the public works requests for FY 2020.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, members of the board. I'm going to sort of run through these really quickly. These are projects that we're requesting budget for. It's the same projects that we talked about at the workshop last month. But this is a quick summary, and then we also provided additional information in the addendum for these projects. And I want to walk through them really quickly so you have an idea of, in terms of looking at the table, what they are describing. If you take a look at the very first line on the spreadsheet, road capacity expansion, Pine Island Road, it was originally slated to start in 2020. At the current plan, we're still planning on starting it in 2020, so there's no change in the date. And so if you see the column, there's a shift, there's a blank there because there's no shifting that will be involved in terms of that we're contemplating for the schedule. Moving over to the next column is the original estimate, $24 million. Our current estimate is that number is still pretty good. We still believe that project is going to be coming in around $24 million. So the column next to it that says change, again, this blank, there's no change in terms of the budget estimate. The final column there is what we're asking for that project. For that project, we're asking for a little over $2 million in order to start the design of this project. And as we talked about last time, all of these projects involve design. There's one project that involves installation of equipment. We're starting the program at the moment, so there's no construction that is no construction money that we're requesting for. As these projects progress, you're going to see these projects again, and at that point, at the appropriate time, we'll be requesting construction dollars for the same projects. Okay. So that's sort of the explanation of the first line. What I'd like to jump to is a little bit further down into the spreadsheet where you can see the first brown arrow going to the left, heading from the right to the left, and that is project on Commercial Boulevard, adaptive signal control system. Yeah, thanks, Lenny. And it was originally stated to start in 2020. We're planning on moving it into our 5-year plan as we develop it. The next time you're going to see our budget proposal. And the reason for that is that we want to be able to coordinate this project with some work that FDOT is doing in the vicinity. We do not want to do any overlap or have any inconsistency in the project. So in order to allow for better coordination, we're planning on moving that, and that's why you see the arrow from the left to the right.
And I just wanted to, for those of you that might be watching, there are hyperlinks. If you go to this document on the webpage, you can actually hyperlink to a narrative explanation of every project.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a good point. In the hyperlink, it has more descriptions in terms of the scope of work, what our expectations are, and that type of thing. And it's all, yeah, there it is. It's in terms of the same information that I'm briefly summarizing here. Okay. If we go back to the top, and so that explains the project with the arrow going from the left to the right. I just want to jump down a little bit further, 2 lines down, and this is also the adaptive signal control project on University Drive, where you see the arrow going from the right to the left. And the reason for that is that we're going to, it was originally slated for 2022, we're going to do it in 2020. A couple reasons for it is that since we're moving some projects out, we want to be able to move some projects in. And the University Avenue, it's a very good project. We think that this is an area that's going to be, provide benefits, so we're happy that we were able to move it up a couple of years in terms of, excuse me, in terms of the starting the project. Again, all these projects we talked about up to this point have no change in the cost, and the money that we're requesting for in 2020 is the money to start the design of these projects. So let me go a little bit further down.
Can I go into, can I just, I just want to ask a question about that category, okay? Because I read the scope of work. Does that have anything to do with what we were shown at the workshop where there's cameras and they're identifying, like that project that's going on in Gainesville? Does that have anything?
It's kind of tied to that. It is a new technology that is going to both involve cameras and also sensors on the roadway, so that we can get a real-time traffic conditions, and then using an algorithm in the in a software in our computer system that automatically adjusts the timing of the signals on a real-time basis in reflection on the current traffic volume. So it is a relatively new technology. There's only one project that has been implemented in Broward County at this point. The FDOT is implementing it. It has a lot of promise, and it provides a real-time control of traffic, and it's only applicable in certain situations. It's not applicable. You can't not use that technology everywhere throughout the county. It's certain situations. Yeah, right.
So,
I'm sorry.
that was going to be my question.
Right.
Is this something that we plan to have countywide?
We do plan to have it countywide, but in segments that we believe are appropriate. That there's I believe in total the program has 22 separate adaptive signal control projects. I think these are 22 or 23. I can't remember the exact number, but they are all throughout the county in areas that we believe are that this technology would make sense. And I think what may be instructive too is that as we go forward and we go a little bit further down the line, because one of the things we're doing is we have a consultant that's working on to identify which of these software programs is the best technology for Broward County. I think at the appropriate time, we would want to invite the consultant here to this board and give a more detailed presentation on the actual aspects of it, and they'll be able to give you a much more detailed technical description of the project. I think that may be a good.
Yeah, that would be, and I can. That's something of interest to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people in the public. This program and moving people faster.
Yeah,
is
and it's a new technology, so it's would not be surprising that that all of us are not as familiar with it, but that's something that I think we're going to have to also educate ourselves and also educate the public on how it works, because it's a little different from the way our signal systems operate, on the segments that when we apply them.
I just had a quick question on line 1, just dealing with the road capacity expansion and the dollars dedicated to designing that. It seems to be a little less than 10% of the total cost. Is that a benchmark that we can use kind of going forward in terms of what we can expect in terms of design costs?
There are benchmarks, but this is not. But let me explain that a little bit. It's typically for larger projects, as this one is, $24 million of construction. The percent of the construction is going to be around 10%, roughly around there. For smaller projects, you're still going to need to do the same workup and the engineering and that type of thing. So for smaller construction volume projects, the percent of design and so forth is going to be higher. And so that's in general, that's the way it is. And then it also really depends on the complexity of the project. There's certain projects that are going to be much more complex than others. So in which case, that may even increase it above the generality that I just mentioned. So they are kind of benchmarks, but it's not a static number of, let's say, 10%. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit further down the line and start to get into the areas where we have the first green and and red arrow, Lenny, if you don't mind, if you can just scroll down there a little bit more. Yes, see the first green arrow there. That is a project, one of our intersection improvement project, Flamingo Road, and no change in the date, but what you see here is a little shift in cost, and I wanted to just kind of highlight that. Originally, it was estimated at $1.4 million based on, and again, what you see here is that all of those projects were I mentioned before, we use an average number when we estimated these projects during the planning phase. When we got into the details of it a little bit, that intersection, we believe that we can do it at a much lower cost. So that's why you have a $600,000, the green arrow going down. Now, if you take a look at the next three, they're a little bit more complex than what we would normally expect. So you see the arrow, and so if you take a look at the next line, the cost estimate is at best we can tell right now is going to be about $2.1 million, a little bit over 2.1. So we indicated with an arrow going up to highlight and make sure the board is aware that those are some of the costs that are going forward. So that's the format of the table. I just want to go through and explain that, and every situation where we either shifting the project forward, backwards, where the cost up or cost goes down, we highlight it to the board so you can see it quickly. And again, if you're interested in more detailed information, they're in the hyperlink, or they have been included in the hyperlink and also in the addendum. You didn't have the hyperlink as part of your package, but it was in the addendum package, and I was able to have an opportunity to share with some of the members some photos of some of the location. We didn't have it in time when we met with you. So, but no change in information, just a little bit, a couple photos and that type of thing. So, yeah,
Can
please.
I make one quick point? One thing that may be worth noting for the public, and then also just to kind of put it out there, is that these cost estimates, the best I understand, and obviously this is your area, so you can jump in, are estimates based on prior projects.
Right.
So as these go forward, we're going to get estimates for these actual jobs. So then the estimates are going to also change.
Right.
So I think something we need to talk about, maybe not right now, but at some point, is what is the mechanism and what is the threshold for the look back on these, and how are we going to kind of track them as they go forward? And that's something I'm very concerned with. So it's something that I think that we should kind of establish. I mean, one of the things I learned in my meeting with the county officials is that 20% is kind of the county policy, and maybe you guys can explain that a little bit more, where you kind of revisit, highlight it as a budget variance, those sorts of things. But I think it's something we need to think through.
And speaking to that, because we did have that conversation in our meeting as well. But the other thing is, it would be interesting at the end of the year or going into the following year, sales tax might change. What we projected as revenue. So, because, you can set a projected budget in 2018 or whenever we did this to get the surtax, and then you go 10 years down the road and inflation and cyclical changes in costs, whether it's an up cycle or a down cycle, will change things. And so will sales tax, I think. So it would be nice to get a true up. I think that's what you're asking for on the expense side.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be good to get a true up on the revenue side too, because we might be tracking if you go by, bottom line. If you use the bottom line as your performance measure, it might be that we are within a budget if the revenues are increasing and costs are too, due to natural causes. So I would agree with Mr. Smith. Go ahead.
Okay. So that's a general idea in some of the flow charts, and I just want to also highlight perhaps a couple of things. If what you have in the spreadsheet here too is, if as an example, if you go to some of the showing the arrows going down right in here. Some of the projects, just because of the natural progression, we were able to fund it with the gas tax fund. So they were originally part of they are still part of the Surtax plan, but we're able to take it, fund it with the gas tax. So what you see here is that for those projects, Under the current estimate, current estimate is actually 0 because they've already funded with an alternative different source. And then, of course, we won't be asking for any funding from the Oversight Board to approve on those projects. So just want to highlight that. I'll be happy to, if the board,
That's all right.
yeah, please.
So the gas tax funds that were coming in, still coming in, are being spent on transportation because they're required to be spent on transportation.
Right.
So in addition to the surtax money, you've got those funds, and you're just telling us that's how that got paid. They're
right.
not being, they have to be used for transportation.
Right, exactly. They have to be used for transportation
And that's
projects.
just a bonus, so
Yeah.
we're gonna get that much more from the,
Right, because it's what we anticipate is that as we go. I'm
That's
sorry,
all
am
right,
I
that's
am I
good.
cutting
No,
you off?
No, no, I just was curious, we know what our budgets were for city projects, operations, maintenance, and new stuff. How much gas tax money is also anticipated every year?
Yeah, well, I think what I think what we kind of anticipate is that the county used to fund these type of projects with the gas tax. There were obviously not enough money available, and that's why we headed into the Surtax route. What I can see there is that there's a transition as our program goes forth. Most, if not all, of these projects are going to be funded with the surtax as part of this plan. So there'll be less.
Confused there. If the money is coming from gas tax and has to be spent on transportation, why wouldn't it continue to be spent, gas tax money on transportation? And if
They are.
Well, you just said they're gonna be more,
It's a shifting because there are other elements of the gas tax projects that other projects that are funded with gas tax. As an example, in this program, we did not include any of our normal maintenance type activities, repaving of the county roads, guardrails, replacement, and that type of thing.
you're using
Those are
gas tax money.
Exactly. we're-
Okay.
Right.
What percentage of the surtax funds over the life of this do the gas tax funds, is it 10%, 5%, 50%? Now, how much money coming in this gas tax? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that
Okay, well,
question
next
right
month,
off.
or month after.
What's
I
that?
think it's important for us
Yeah.
to know. One, we want to make sure that the surtax money is being spent wisely, but also you're still spending gas tax money to help.
I think I can see that there will be a gradual transition, that these projects just happen to be able to be funded with the gas tax. What we're going to see is that on the gas tax side of it, we're shifting it primarily to the maintenance activities that are not funded by the surtax.
So our
Right.
surtax money will spend less on maintenance because of the more gas tax money.
On the maintenance type projects, yeah, because we're not spending any gas tax money on our own maintenance projects at all in this program. Those are going to continue to be funded by the gas tax as they have been doing. We're just going to be able to do more of the maintenance, the potholes, and repaving the roadway and restriping existing roads and so forth.
Mr. Allen?
I think in the past, the gas tax revenues have been used to do not only maintenance,
Right.
but new projects, expansions, enhancements. And you're going to see over the years, I believe, that the surtax revenues will be used for the enhancements, the
And the
improvements.
expansion.
But yet, if you don't do your maintenance over the 30-year period, it's going to be meaningful that we've invested all that money into these enhancements that we can't maintain.
Good point, based on your knowledge.
Again, I think that the recommendation that Mr. Smith made about a true-up or some way of going over where we are at either the end of the year or the beginning of the next year, I think that's going to be important. Because you start looking at, the county might go out and get a federal grant or a state grant and combine it with the surtax, and we might find that some of the costs on other projects are lower, and we can spend them on other things. So that's going to be a fluid thing, and we just got to make sure we get as much done as we can and try to hit the objectives that we want to hit on an annual basis, and don't spend more than we make.
And I think
So with that, I'm happy to go over the projects on an individual basis, or if there's any questions on the projects, I'll be happy to just take the questions and try to answer them. Okay.
Alan, I think there was one project that they're pursuing federal funds. That's why it went down,
Right.
knowing they're going to get federal funds later.
Right. So if anybody, through your, going over your notes from the backup for the meeting, does anybody have any of the projects that they would like to specifically discuss? Mr. Smith, I'm seeing your,
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So one is when you see like the fiber optic networks, and this kind of relates back to what Alan was saying, I just want to make sure that, are these things kind of integrated? So in other words, if, I guess the hope would be is that we're looking at this thing holistically and saying we're going to have some sort of integrated, you know, like one of the presentations we got from FDOT was pretty amazing, talking about all the new technology. So I just want to make sure that this is not kind of a patchwork, and then when you see like fiber optics, that it's going to eventually connect all in,
Yeah.
and how that ties into the master plan for the technological improvements.
Absolutely. We're building a backbone that is that's a connected network, and what we also do, just for your information too, is that as we built our fiber optic network, we work closely with FDOT, who is also constructing fiber in some of the roadways, and all of them are tied together, and we share fiber so that we don't repeat what others have done. But it's going to be, you know, the plan is to be an integrated network. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think in one of the presentations, and I can see if I can pull it up for you, that we did very early on for you, we show a slide that has all of the existing fiber that's in the ground in black, and I don't know if we can get it quickly, but I will try. And that's the fiber that's already in the ground, that's been laid by the state or the county, and most of it is in the eastern part of the county. And so we're utilizing Surtax funds and the DOT 5-year work plan to try to create this network so that every part of the county is connected. And a lot of the work that Tony is going to be doing is going to be in the north and the west, southwest. And so you'll see a lot of these fiber projects are in those areas because there's already fiber in the ground on the east side.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add that the county outside of the surtax has a significant amount of fiber that they use to feed county facilities, and when we look at something like the surtax fiber, we are also talking with cities about where their fiber is and where they see the gaps are, and we're trying to create loops and redundancy so that, you know, when we do move to adaptive signalization and we do have all these technologies, and maybe, you know, there's an issue on one part of the fiber, well, we can reroute it, you know, in the loop and maintain connectivity, as well as do backup over cellular. And the fiber is also a good place to string 5G off of and get that sort of connectivity. So we are thinking about all that as we do this. And it's not just, oh, let's put in one little piece of fiber because we want to serve this traffic light. It really is looked at by a multitude of agencies, and we're basically trying to build out an extensive fiber system throughout the entire county. I know that I've been in multiple meetings, and our county administrator, one of the first questions she asks when we're doing a project is, why aren't you putting fiber under that parking lot or in that? You know, we're just basically putting it everywhere we can, even if it's dark, and so that we can connect it up later. And ultimately, you know, we'd like to light up the whole county. That really is a goal.
Any more questions? I have a couple. I just, you know, you've got 2 or 3 or 4 items under corridor implementation studies. Just for the public, can you just give us a highlight as to what those studies, the goals, you know, generally what those studies are for?
Okay, yeah, thank you. When we started taking a look in detail of some of how to implement some of these projects, taking a look both from a global picture of all of the projects that are being proposed by the county, and then also the city projects that we haven't discussed yet at this point that are awaiting ranking by the MPO and so forth. There's certain areas that some of these projects, both county, city, and kind of clustered together around certain corridors. And what we wanted to do was that, in taking a look at it, what we wanted to make sure that we don't do is that we don't have the type of thing that we're not coordinated, that we don't want to go in and implement let's say a county project, and then a couple months later, a city comes in and implement their project in close proximity with each other. So what we wanted to do was, we wanted, in these areas where we see some of this clustering, that we want to take a look and kind of evaluate them and make sure that we're going to provide a project delivery method of working together with the cities and FDOT and MPO and so forth, is that that these projects can, where applicable, should be done together. And so what we identified is that about 9 corridors throughout the county, and what you see here is, and we talked about this at the workshop last time a little bit, and so the 3 corridors that we actually highlight them in here, says Pine Island Road, Andrews Avenue, and Atlantic Boulevard, that we can kind of take a look at what is the optimal project delivery method. What we're going to do is that what you can see here is that when right at the moment, we're not asking you for any money for these 3 projects right at the moment. And the reason for it is that we talked about last time, there are certain new projects that were not originally part of the Surtax plan, even though we think that this is really part of the program, because these are really conglomeration of a number of little projects together. But nevertheless, I think that we didn't ask for any money right at the moment. What we intend to do is that we want to ask our board for approval for that, and in addition to a couple projects. And once our board approve it, we will bring it back to this oversight board for approval. So what these studies are is essentially looking at these corridors, identifying areas where it makes sense to work projects together, and the optimum project delivery method, in order that we make sure that we're coordinated with the multiple agencies, in order that we make sure that we minimize the public as little as possible. So those are the intent of the projects, not asking for any money right at the moment, but we intend to bring that back to you in a couple months, for that request after our board has approved them.
Tony, can I assume when they come back that'll be a red arrow? Am I reading it right?
What's that?
It'll be a red arrow.
It'll be.
It will not be a red arrow.
No? What else is it going to be?
It's a new
I thought you
project.
said it wasn't in there.
Yeah.
So you can see on the description to the right that the costs of these studies were actually built
Right.
into the program. So each of the projects that would be in the corridor would have design costs and study costs
Study costs.
associated with the capital, just like the others. So we feel that there's actually more than necessary to do these studies in the program, but we're going to do that analysis before we bring it back to you for your approval.
Well, then what you'll have is an original estimate and this estimate, and there will be no arrow.
The problem with that is that the original estimates were done on a project-by-project basis
Right.
rather than on a corridor basis.
Right.
But yes, we're going to do the analysis for you.
Tony, with what you're talking about now, I mean, is this kind of this catch-all deferred program cost that we have? I'll give you an example. The last project listed, bike lanes, complete streets, and it just says deferred program cost. And then up above, we have for the intersection improvements, it just says deferred program cost a bunch of times. What's the definition of that?
What that means is that because we're moving the program out that originally planned for 2020, let's say the first project on the bike lanes, 2020, we're going to move it out to sometime within the next 5 years. The cost of the program, we still have costs associated with that project. We're just going to ask you for money at a later point in time.
So this doesn't really speak to why it's being moved out. It just wasn't ready for whatever reason or not prioritized, but we're just saying deferred program costs mean we're going to come back at some point.
Yeah, and in the backup, we also provide reasons for why we have moved the project out.
Okay.
If you were to take a look at the bike lane project, the first one on Knob Hill, the reason that we have rescheduled it is because we're currently doing some major drainage improvements in that area, and we don't want that to conflict with the bike lane design.
And if we've located a project inside of a corridor, So once Tony and the internal staff identified all of the projects that existed inside of those 9 corridors that he mentioned earlier, so if a project is happening or was planned to have happened, let's say on Commercial Boulevard or on Pine Island, and we know that that's a corridor that we want to look at, then we move those projects into the corridor review rather than advancing them, because again, the whole purpose of doing corridor delivery is so that you only go into that roadway once, right, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, just to sort of elaborate on the spreadsheet to sort of, look at I think the answers are in there, but maybe we can make it a little bit clearer. If you look at like the Hollywood Park and Panther Run, and you've got deferred program costs right here, the answer to why it's deferred is in Addendum A, page 17. And then when you go down here and you look at this one for deferred program costs, kind of like Gretchen said, it's basically saying, well, that's because it's in corridor review. So you kind of have to look at a couple of different places in order to find out. Like in this one, that was deferred, it was rescheduled to coordinate with ongoing drainage. So we tried to put it in there, but maybe your question is, could it be a little bit more consistent or something? Or okay, all right.
Okay, I've got a couple more. So on the I know we talked about it in the workshop, but I think it's important, a couple of these that we're doing, we should highlight. And I'd just give, again, a brief description as to what it is, but this BRT Rapid Bus Infrastructure Plan and Study. And then after that one, since it's right next to each other, the new light rail transit infrastructure planning and study. I just would like to
Okay.
for you to highlight
if I
that.
may, I'm going to ask Mr. Walton to come and address those
Okay.
questions.
At this
Are
time,
there
are there
any-
any more
oh,
Public Works questions?
George, do you?
I did have one question, and it doesn't relate to a specific project, and this might not be the right time to ask it, and I'm not sure if it's a Public Works question or a transportation question, but there is going to be a growing demand in the county for electric vehicle infrastructure, public charging to some degree. Some of it will be private. Has the county been tasked, staff been tasked by the commission, or given the commission's commitment to greenhouse gas reductions, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector is going to be critical. And with the price drops coming on electric vehicles and the technology improving, we're going to be at price parity in another year or two. I think you're going to see an explosion of electric vehicles on Broward County roads. And, again, it's not in reference to a specific project, but I am curious to better understand how that will be integrated into this plan.
So outside of the surtax, the county has budgeted funds for electric vehicle infrastructure, and we actually recently procured a consultant to go to 4 of our largest county facilities and find out what sort of increases in service from FPL we would need in order to put in a robust charging vehicle infrastructure. And that requires, updating transformers and getting, the maximum amount of power that we can put into the site, because a lot of these, like if you look at a single family home, it uses 100 amps, right? Or 200 amps maybe for the whole house. And we can put in one like Tesla supercharger type station, and that would use 300 amps. So you're talking like a house and a half worth of electricity just for one charger. And, the board has a goal of completely electrifying the entire county, normal vehicle fleet, which is 3,000 vehicles. So if you multiply that, we need a whole lot of amperage in order to be able to do this. So we're looking at what the maximum amperage that we can put in those 4 facilities, what upgrades we need to make to our machine room, and then how many charging stations that we can put in. And we're actually procuring electric vehicles right now and putting in charging stations for those vehicles, basically level 2 and some DC fast chargers. And once we get a baseline in for some county vehicles, we are also looking at how much additional power we would have for public charging stations, and then how we might, provide that power to the public and how they can, find them and be able to use them. And so we've looked at various vendors, and we're going to be putting out an RFP and a procurement to have that. And so there is a plan to have electric vehicle charging infrastructure at existing and new county facilities, as well as providing options for the public. And then I believe Dr. Rajaro is working on a project where we may be looking at trying to provide funds or matching funds or grants or something like that to apartment complexes, maybe some employers, to put in some charging stations either for their employees or for the public at those locations. Those are not necessarily surtax funded; they're outside of that. But we are looking into that because we do agree it's an important part of preparing for the future. So,
Is that all you have, George? Ms. Pennant?
I know we discussed this somewhat yesterday in the workshop, but in the interest of the public, I wanted for you to just talk a little bit about how we plan on, breaking out some of these trades respective to the budget that you've just talked about.
Yeah, we in all of these projects that that we have, we're going to we'll be working with our small business divisions in terms of establishing and identifying and complying with the goals that we have for each one of the projects. Each one of the projects will be done on an individual basis. They will be evaluated by our small business office on an individual basis, included, and they will be, as in all county projects, they will have language in the actual procurement that will obligate either the consultants or the contractors to comply with the goals and requirements so that we can establish, be able to spread the work out among our community. We also are working with our small business office to identify, areas that certain type of additional trades may be appropriate. We want to make sure that we provide enough notice, enough training, coordination with the various trade groups so that they can get geared up for the projects and so forth. So we'll be working very closely with our small business office, and the documentation will be included in the procurement package for each individual projects as we go forth.
Right. I just want to, have it on record that the cities, hopefully that we'll be able to get the cities to comply with the county's procurement and supply diversity standards to ensure the level of participation, because for cities that have not historically participated in supply diversity, they may not have the infrastructure or administrative process in place to do so. And so we want to make sure that we get them on board as early as possible, and that it is consistent with the county's requirements. So they shouldn't be getting funds if they're not in line with what we require. Just the same way that the federal government will not allow us to have funds and have those standards if we're getting their money. I think the same principles should be applied to the cities.
That's an interesting point, because it is surtax, right? So is there any answer to that, or?
Oh, yes, there's an answer. In order for us to meet the goal on eligible projects, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in previous meetings, but federal funds, as Ms. Pennant just mentioned, will prohibit us, once we accept federal dollars, from having goals on these projects. So every time we have to balance the desire to leverage federal dollars with the desire to meet that 30% goal for small business and local preference. So the city projects are really important. Smaller projects that wouldn't be leveraged with federal or state money really need to have as high a goal as possible. And as you saw earlier, we are almost at a 50-50 split this year between county projects and city projects. And so making sure that we have municipalities that have the capacity and technical assistance and the resources to be able to establish solicitation guidelines that really encourage small business participation is one of the things that we're working on right now, and one of the reasons why we've come to you to request funds to provide resources to our Office of Economic and Small Business Development.
Is that right? You can only
Thank
encourage.
you.
Oh, no, we can require. Oh, you are? Okay, 'cause I just thought you were saying you can only encourage.
No, we intend to require it as part of our interlocal agreements, and we've talked to the municipalities about that for surtax funds. If you want surtax dollars, you're going to have to be able to establish goals.
That's great. Good question.
I have a question. So in terms of exactly where the projects themselves have already been approved, right? The project itself. When we have this at this point, we see the project, there's a total dollar amount per the project, and that has already been approved by the commission, correct?
Correct.
So we're looking, when we look at the request, that is for the design, in this instance, portion of that approved project. And that's what we're asking in terms of asking us to say yes to that, and then it goes forward to do the appropriation to spend for the design only.
Right.
So we would be subsequently getting a budget when we're in the construction phase.
Right.
That will be coming forward in the future.
Yes.
That's
So
correct.
every phase, because I can't tell, I know this happens to be designed because we are at the beginning stages, but by looking at that spreadsheet, I can't tell where we are, if it's design, construction. So I think a column, unless I missed it, to show exactly, with a legend, a D, a C, we would then be able to distinguish where we are in the project itself. So I think that would be helpful as we move forward.
Yeah, good point. In the future, when there's a mixture of design and construction projects, we'll make sure we delineate that.
Alan, are we done
Yeah.
with the spreadsheet, you think?
No, I had two more questions. I
then
just
I-
need
Oh,
Chris.
I'm sorry.
No, Chris Walton.
Chris,
Walton.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. No, that's,
Oh, that's mine. Okay.
Morning.
Good morning.
Is it my turn?
Yes,
Oh.
you've got the floor.
Okay. Well, before you start, I just wanted to address a couple things. The gentleman that asked from the public the question about the microtransit systems. I just want to make you all aware that we, for the last year, have been in discussions about implementing microtransit systems across the county. What microtransit systems are, the very short definition is a public transit system that you don't have to walk to, it comes to you. It's a door-to-door type system. And it typically operates in a smaller area. We've been in touch with a number of vendors, and the reason we haven't implemented it so far is that there is one primary concern that we have to overcome, and it is the vehicle itself. Typically what we've seen here in South Florida for the microtransit vehicles that are being at an operation, they are the modified golf carts, and they don't meet the state standard, the state safety standard of 1490. So we'll be going to our board this fall with an RFP for microtransit systems to pilot a few of them in the county. But the primary element in that solicitation will be the requirement that the vehicle that they use must meet all. Do I need to start over?
No,
Oh, okay, good. We'll be going to our board this fall with solicitation to implement microtransit systems on a pilot basis, requiring that the vehicles that will be in use will be 1490 is the state standard for state safety, and we will make sure that requirement is incorporated. And that has really been the only prohibition up to this point. So he's absolutely right. I mean, the microtransit systems are very effective in many places around the country, and we believe they'll be very effective here. And we're looking forward to the implementation of microtransit systems. Another point I just want to kind of throw out to you that we'll be coming back to you at some point is, our service operates pretty much 21 hours a day from approximately 12:30 until about 4 in the morning. We don't really have service in the street. So I've been in discussions with our county administrator about developing some sort of late hour service for those industries, such as healthcare, such as entertainment, that we can get to work because they may start when our services start, but when their shifts end, we're no longer providing service. So we're looking at, and I'll be bringing that information back to you as well, but we're looking at implementing some type of service. Don't really know what it's going to be like yet, but we are looking to cover those hours where we don't operate our fixed route service. So something just to look forward to.
Okay.
Chris, is that based on demand? I mean, do you have demand figures for that? I realize there's shifts of people late at night and there's a need, but what's the cost benefit of something like that?
Well, we're actually doing surveys at this point to develop what that demand could potentially be out there. We know that there are certain industries, we've been in contact with the hotel industry. We know that in many situations where they have rotating shifts in healthcare, that their shifts may end after our service hours. So we're determining exactly what level of service would be necessary to cover that need.
Great.
Okay. So in terms of, did you want to just go directly to your questions or?
Yeah, well, I think we should highlight things like rapid bus study and then the light rail transit study and what it speaks to, just like an overview and so
Okay.
the public can.
Sure. We're asking for money for 2 studies, primarily. And the first, and the information will work in tandem, but one will follow the other. The first is more of a high-level study. Typically, transit systems do what's called a COA, or Comprehensive Operational Analysis, every 5 to 7 years or so, to take really an overview of how your system is actually performing. You take a look to see if the origins and destinations and the dynamics and the demographics of your county have changed, and how you should make changes in your transit system to adapt to those changes. Again, and it falls back into what we talked about earlier in terms of micro-transit systems. Historically, public transit has been fixed route transit, and that's been pretty much it. But we know that the transit system of tomorrow actually incorporates fixed route. It incorporates the Lyfts, the Ubers. It incorporates the micro-transit systems. It incorporates other terms like mini transit. But it's also going to incorporate here in Broward County something that we've never had before, and it's the ability to move people, large numbers of people, on a larger scale on some of our most heavily traveled corridors. So the first study we want to do is to take a look at our high capacity corridors and determine what level of service that would be appropriate for those corridors. In some cases, it would be what we call rapid bus, which is a bus service that comes maybe every 10, 15 minutes. In some cases, it would be a bus rapid transit, which is a high level of what we call rapid bus with other amenities. And in some cases, it will be some form of rail. Historically, we've talked about rail in this county as light rail, which is typically run at grade. But the technologies of the future are developing, and it may or may not be a light rail system at grade. It could be a system that runs in the air, or it could be a system that runs in a combination of both at grade, and at certain points it could be elevated. So the first study will take a look at just identifying those corridors in the county and validating what we believe are the areas that we're pretty confident, but we just need validation from our consultants that these studies will show us which are the most appropriate corridors for these types of transits and delineations for those transits. The second one is much more intense in terms of the LRT, which would be we would take the information from the first study and couple it with a more in-depth study. Once we've determined that there are corridors in this county that do need rail transit, and the plan calls for 26 miles of it, then there's much more information that is needed, much more in-depth information in terms of the study process that would be required in order for us to achieve matching federal funds. They require what's called an alternative analysis, which actually takes a look at what type of system should be built. Should you build any system at all? Can buses satisfy the need, or should there be some other form of transportation? It also requires that you do what's called the LPA, or the locally preferred alternative, which determines which is the best routing. You've got to go much more in depth in terms of the environmental analysis, public participation. So that second study for the rail transit will be much more in-depth, but these again are the requirements that are placed upon us by the federal government to make sure or to assist us in receiving federal dollars to assist with the building of these projects, because in the plan, we did identify certain segments that we could cover ourselves, but overall, we did make some assumptions that there would be federal dollars that would assist us in building out our light rail network.
Are there any questions? Mr. Allen?
Since we are fortunate enough to have the Surtax available for new project development, as you're going through these planning studies, are we going to be subjected to every one of these planning studies being subject to the federal requirements relative to environmental issues? It's a long, drawn-out process. And if we've got the opportunity to accelerate these projects by saying we don't want to go through that document of regulations in order to speed these things up, are we looking to do that where possible?
We are in some cases, and again, we would do that mindful of all the federal rules and regulations, because the answer is yes. Oh, okay. Okay. The short answer is yes, but we would do that, building that segment of project following all the federal guidelines on our own, so that we could use it as match for subsequent pieces, meaning that investment that we use the Surtax dollars for could be applied and used as federal match for subsequent phases. But the answer is yes, we could do it on our own without the federal regulations.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right, that was great. Thank you, Chris.
Sure.
Do you have a question?
I just had a comment, if Gretchen could, the summary that you started off with is a summary of these sheets, correct? Could you go over that one more time? Because I think that's basically what we're looking at to spend or approve to spend in 2020, correct? And there could be other county projects come in, but there's certainly going to be cities coming in later in 2020 or later this year for 2020?
Horace, I just wanted to, were you gonna answer his question first? Go ahead, sorry.
I'm finished, but I don't have an answer.
Go ahead.
Yes, so what you're looking at on this spreadsheet is the county fiscal year 2020 ask. The county's fiscal year begins October 1. These are consistent with your addenda H, I, and J, in that our county administrator will be bringing forth recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. There will be public hearings that will have to be held to determine what is going to be funded for fiscal year 2020, and those happen in September. And so what we're doing here today is asking you to approve the allocation of funds that we will then spend and be reporting to you on a regular basis. And there will also be $137.4 million set aside for potential municipal projects that the MPO will be prioritizing and bringing forth in the early spring. Right now, it's slated for February. We have an interlocal agreement first amendment that would allow it to move to March because it took a little bit longer than we anticipated to negotiate that agreement. And yes, as we mentioned in our briefings with each of you, there are some new projects. They're identified, 3 of them are identified in gold in the spreadsheet, and then there are a couple that we did not feel had ever been contemplated, so we didn't include them in the spreadsheet. The planning studies for the corridors, we believe, were part of the original financial plan. They were in the individual project design costs, as I mentioned earlier. However, there were a few projects in the public works area, and I believe 1 or 2 in the transit area that we talked about at the workshop, that based on your direction, we removed from the spreadsheet. We will be taking to our board in August, and then we will bring that back to you in September, again, prior to the October 1 fiscal year beginning. Does that answer your question, Vice Chair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pennant, did you have a
Yes.
question?
So Chris, I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but just for the record and in the interest of the public, it's easy to see where opportunities will exist in public works for our small businesses. So when you're talking about buying buses, no, there is not a great likelihood that we'll have small businesses that can provide buses. So can you articulate on some level where you see opportunities for small businesses to participate on some of the projects that you are going to be?
Sure. There's 2, as a matter of fact, that I want to point out. One, if you go, Lenny, to it's about 3/4 of the way down to the new transit infrastructure where it speaks to bus shelters. Over the last 6-7 years, the county has built almost 800 bus shelters. When we initiated that program, we used some of the ARA funds to do it. When that program was initiated, we had options. We had options to solicit contracts to do them on a county-wide basis using large firms, or we decided, or we could actually break them up into smaller contracts and solicit smaller firms. We decided that we would break them up and solicit smaller firms. We actually met with the Minority Builders Council. We actually brought them in and discussed, what were their concerns. Because what we're talking about here is building bus shelters, which are primarily permitting concrete slabs, in some cases small vertical structures in some cases prefabricated, in some cases cast in place shelters. And we were quite successful in attracting a number of small businesses. And if you've noticed the number of shelters that have gone up around the county, most of them, practically all of them, were built by small businesses. If you notice in the plan here, we had identified 150 shelters a year that we want to build in the county.
Wow.
We didn't build any last year using Surtax funds, so what we intend to do is build 150. We're going to double, I'm sorry, I think I misspoke, 75 a year. But we're going to double up this year and build 150. We provided you with the locations of all those shelters. And it is our intent to solicit as many small business opportunities to build those shelters as we can.
Awesome.
Additionally, the very last project that you see is under new transit infrastructure. It is the rehabilitation of our northern operating facility. Right now, we're asking you for $2.5 million. That all told would be about a $62 million project. 2 things I want to make you aware of. We have applied for a federal capital grant of $20.5 million that we hope to receive in the next few months that hopefully will offset the cost of that project by 1/3. But within that construction project, there are a number of opportunities for small businesses in terms of demolition, in terms of concrete, in terms of construction. Electricians will need, so there will be a number of opportunities under either, hopefully, under a prime contractor, or even a number of subs under a prime. There will be a number of opportunities for small business to participate.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is there, you talked to me yesterday about propane conversion for certain vehicles that you'll be acquiring. Is there a local opportunity in that propane conversion process, for some of the existing vehicles?
The propane vehicles are converted locally. Well, what Ms. Kelly is talking about is our both our paratransit program and our community bus program. Most of the cutaway vehicles that we buy for paratransit come to us outfitted with propane conversion kits. Some of the smaller vehicles that we'll be using for our paratransit service have to be converted after purchase, and those are converted using a local vendor.
Yeah, so that is an opportunity as well.
Mhm.
Okay, that's good.
Mr. Smith and then Mr. Cavros.
So one thing I was thinking of while I was sitting here is how do we, and maybe you've contemplated this, how do we change the image around our buses? And meaning, if we're going to put all this money in, and hopefully there will be a day we have a light rail that connects to the buses, that connects to Brightline, and all these things are interconnected, how do we get people on them? And are there, when we talk about our oversight of funds to improve congestion, we need to get people that have cars to actually use these things, not just people that have to use them. It's very important, because if we don't, then we're not going to really stop congestion that much, and I'm afraid we're going to have nice new empty buses.
I don't necessarily share that concern, because I think, what we have seen in our history, even though it hasn't been, very well funded, but when we can provide public transportation that is efficient, clean, and travel times that are somewhat comparable to cars, people will ride. And the best example I can give you of that are the express buses that we run to Miami from South Broward every day. We carry over 2,500 people on those routes daily who actually come to our park and ride lots. And these are business professionals, doctors, attorneys, many people who work at the health center in Miami, who actually park their cars in our park and ride lots and get on our express buses. What we also see in what we call our breeze services that we operate on 4 routes in the county. These are services that are what we call limited stop. They don't stop every block and a half. And they tend to travel 22 to 25% faster than our local routes. We see substantial ridership on those routes. So we believe that once the system is much more robust, once our headways are shortened, once our vehicles, and again, thanks to your assistance, we have ordered 147 new buses that will start arriving around Christmas. And in every case, historically, what we have seen is when we have improved our service, when we've shortened our headways, we've seen ridership increases. So that, in combination with all of the other evaluation in terms of the different types of transit systems, like the inclusion of microtransit, we're actually looking at how we can integrate both Lyft and Uber into our public transit system. We think in combination we will see a growth in ridership.
And if I might, we're also looking at the amenities, shelters, making sure that the shelters are adequate, that people have access to Wi-Fi, that they have information about real-time, when the buses will be arriving. And that's one of the reasons why we integrated the innovation component. And one of the things that we're working really closely with Lenny, and we'll be using our communications, our new PIO, we'll be using that communications consultant service that you approved for FY19 to try to make people more comfortable. We have found that there are quite a few people who don't utilize public transportation primarily because they just have never done it, and there's a fear around it because they don't know what to expect. So by giving people 3D visualizations of how to actually utilize a bus and how to transfer and how to even, an augmented reality experience, we feel you can break down those barriers of fear. And I also want you all to know that every person that is hired into MAP admin and paid for with Surtax funds has an expectation to be utilizing some type of single occupancy vehicle alternative on a regular basis in order to participate.
And just being perfectly honest, I would just add, we just haven't had the resources we really haven't had a system to market. I think now we do. And you will see substantial improvement over the next couple of years. Gretchen's right. I mean, right now we have a mobile app that can tell you where if you're at a bus stop, it'll tell you the times of the next 3 buses. You can go on the website and find the same information. You can, on some of our buses, you can download books. You can download music. Our newer buses have information screens that are providing information in terms of points of interest and messages that we want to communicate to our passengers. All of our new buses will have that information. There are a number of improvements that we have made and are making. We are planning for significant improvements in security. So just a number of improvements that we have to make in order to make our system more attractive.
And I just want to add that, that's one of the really cool things I think about being able to be involved with this is that, I started thinking more about what my average speed is in my vehicle, and I think I want to be able to get that information out to the public as far as like how quickly their average speed really is. Like I was mentioning before, I looked at my car, and over the last 2,500 miles, I was averaging like 24 miles per hour, and it sort of shocked me when I saw that. And, when you look at something like Waze, and every day on I-95, it'll show you the average speed, and it's like 15 miles an hour, And so one of the things we want to do is put these sensors out there to do the studies and find out where the common origin and destinations are in the county, and then compare those to the transit times and have people understand this is how what your average speed's actually going to be on the roads you're taking to get to work. This is what the average speeds would be on the bus, as well as Gretchen was talking about, we're looking into some augmented reality things just to make the buses more accessible and easier. Like we've talked to some people about, you might be able to hold up your phone and it'll, superimpose over the bus what number it is, where it's going, how long it might take to get there, what the stops are, just so you have a better understanding without having to go and read a bus schedule, like where that bus is going, or hold it up and see on the side of the bus shelter when the next couple of buses are coming. As well as I've looked at some places like in the Innovation Center in Denver, and they routinely will tell you, hey, here's some common destinations from this location, and this is how long it would take you on a bus, this is how long it would take you in an Uber, this is how long it would take you if you drove. And so just finding ways to educate people about what their real advantage is to commuting and whether or not they could actually save time or have the same length of time, as well as using that data to come up with better bus stops and better bus routes and, more accommodate the types of passengers that do have a choice. And so I think a combination of things, it's like layers, right? So we make the buses a little nicer, we have more buses, they come faster, we give people more data about commuting, we give, hopefully some improved bus routes, we have better amenities, we have, people that can use the bus, with their phone or, whatever, way is easier for them. And as well as give them more information about how they can connect to a bus and maybe use a greenway or a micro-mobility option, or even, what the gentleman was talking about earlier, the sort of on-demand, smaller micro bus routes, or even just, some of the buses not necessarily having a fixed route, but having the ability to say, hey, I actually need you to come pick me up. And maybe if nobody's done that and you don't see anybody, the bus doesn't have to stop, and so maybe it saves a little bit of time. So, just various ways of incrementally shaving off as much as we can and making the bus an attractive alternative.
Yes, go ahead.
Also, I think what we're seeing from a land use perspective and planning is the changing demographics and the millennials and the abandonment to some degree of personal vehicles in favor of transit, living downtown. So I think you're also, I would presume that you're looking at the changing demographics, and that we're not just looking at changing the nature of existing people, but also planning for this future group that's technologically more savvy. I mean, there may be people here who are still trying to figure out how to use an Uber app, but you see a young person and they're banging it away, and they can do all this stuff. It's just second nature. And I think that once we get away from that technological homophobic demographic and move to that younger group, you're going to see a greater desire in the use of these vehicles. And when Lenny, you're talking Denver. Look who lives in Denver. It's an amazing place. I would like to live in Denver, but anyway, I just wanted to throw that out, that I think when you're thinking about what Chris will be planning for in the future, it's not our brain. It's a new brain and a new way of thinking of things.
And you're right. And one of the studies where we talk about the comprehensive operational analysis, that is a significant part of it, because there is a huge public involvement process where we're actually interviewing people, where we're interviewing every age demographic, there's a significant portion of the study that's dedicated to finding out, what people really want in their transit system, what makes them, what attracts them to transit, and what will actually improve, and the types of things that we need to do as a system to bring them to our system. So you're absolutely right. We do know that many millennials here are not interested in owning cars, but we've got to be able to develop the transit system that they would want to use, and we're not quite there yet.
Mr. Kuhlman, do you have something?
Yeah, we haven't forgotten about the Wi-Fi big on the bus and the new colored buses either, right?
We have not.
When is the graphic marketing thing, what's the status of that?
You want to talk about it? Yeah.
We are hopefully in the next week going to be able to put an RFP out on the street at a little over $1 million a year that will have a menu of services that individuals, firms can bid on. And we are looking at branding, logos, messaging, social media management, all of those components that we've talked about over the last few months. And so we are waiting to brand until we have someone on board, but it should be within the next 6 months.
I think on this item, I think it's important to point out what Chris said. When you have a robust system, when you have something to actually sell, that's when you're going to be able to get choice riders to move from cars and onto some of these systems. And the system includes traffic signalization and other things that make your life more pleasurable even if you stay in your car. But we are in the beginning of a 30-year phased project, and we're all excited. I think we're all excited for the final outcome, but it's an incremental thing. And one of the smartest things is this community, and through leadership at the county level and the folks that helped market the surtax, vote yes for the surtax thing. This is the smartest thing the community ever did, because we're getting ahead of. If we would have waited 4 or 8 more years to pass this, we would start getting way behind the program, and our lives would become a little bit more miserable. So we're moving forward, but we got to be patient, and we got to just keep doing our job. And professionals like Chris and his staff and the county, I think, are going to keep bringing really great stuff to our table. And while we're on this board, we're going to see incredible changes in the county and the quality of life improvements that are going to occur because of that. Mr. Cabros, did you have something?
Just a quick question for Chris. Could you remind me again what the county's doing in terms of electric buses, just real briefly?
Yeah, we actually have 5 electric buses on order. Just backing up a little bit, we won 2 federal grants for what's called the low or no emissions grants. The first one, we decided that we would buy 5 over-the-road coaches to augment there's new express service. Right now, we run express service from South Broward down I-95. We're working with FDOT to implement a new service next year on I-75 to downtown Miami. And we have ordered 5 electric buses to run that service. In addition, the County Commission has given me the authority to buy 15 additional electric buses once we've proven the technology here on the first 5. We're in the midst of testing electric buses as we speak. We've had 2 of the 4 primary manufacturers bring their buses to Broward. They've been in service, they were in service for 30 days. And we really wanted to put them in to see how they operate in our conditions, in our heat, in our road conditions. And see, the issue with electric buses, as you probably know, is range. They just do not have the range at this point that diesel buses have. So, but there is a place for them, and there is ways to make it fit even with the limited range. So we've tested 2. We've got 2 buses coming in July 29th. One will stay here for 30 days for road testing. One will leave and then come back for an additional 30 days. After which we'll make a decision on which of those manufacturers we would like to purchase for the additional 15. just a little bit more on that. Because of the range limitations, you can't just put a bus out there like you would a regular bus. So we in the industry have what's known as opportunity charging, where you could actually charge the bus en route. And there's a couple ways to do it. Some of the technology have the overhead charging system where the bus lines up and an arm comes and charges it at the end of its run. And some have inductive charging where there's a plate in the ground and the bus lines up over the plate and you charge it that way. We're looking at buying buses and actually putting them on a corridor to maybe electrify one complete corridor. We would probably have to, well, we know at this point we would have to have some opportunity charging because, you know, the batteries themselves won't sustain the duty cycle of the buses. So, but we're moving ahead. The reality is the technology isn't moving as quickly as our industry had thought. We're seeing 5 to 7% increase annually in battery life. Typically, the battery life will get you maybe 100, we're seeing about 160 miles per charge. We need to get close to double that. And the acceleration of the technology hasn't been what we thought it would be. So the opportunity charging is something that we will have to incorporate until we see improvement in battery technology.
You know, also the city of Fort Lauderdale, I think with the help of the county, the TMA, the trolley system, is testing an electric bus. And if you are interested in seeing one, or Karen Wolfel for the city of Fort Lauderdale, would love to show it to you. Any of the board members that would like to see it, I think it already came in?
It was at City Hall yesterday, but it will be in town for the whole month.
Yeah, so if you're interested in seeing a vehicle, you know, there's an opportunity. And then I guess he's going to have one in shortly.
Yeah, we'll have one on the 29th, and we'll make sure that that's available for any of you to take a ride.
It's awesome.
I mean, interesting technology. They're extremely. The biggest complaint about electric buses is passengers don't hear them. So if you're sitting at the bus stop looking at your phone, the bus will go right past you.
It goes right by
you never hear it.
Oh my God.
So what properties are doing, they're putting noise makers like bells or whatever, so people will know that the bus is coming.
More cowbell.
Yeah.
Okay, well, is there any more questions for Mr. Walton? Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right. So
No, I have to do the administration piece. Do you want me to?
the administration piece.
Yes. Of the budget.
Okay, go ahead.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, in a project-based plan, the administrative support services and planning are, you know, kind of secondary, but I just need to, for transparency, bring to your attention that we are requesting that you approve. There are 12 positions, including contractual agreements, travel that we talked about during the workshop, just making sure that if the oversight board members do want to visit other properties at any point in the fiscal year of 2020, that we have adequate resources to do that. Equipment and supplies, and then the transfer to the general fund for 2 legal positions and an auditor position, as well as, again, the costs associated with relocating to GC West, which is at 1 University Drive, so that MAP admin, Public Works, Transit, and Paratransit and Innovation are all co-located in one place with facilities that are adequate to house the oversight board members, with floating offices, meeting space, and public space, as well as an interactive augmented reality cave, is that $1.9 million. We have $191,000 additional dollars for 2 positions doing outreach to the small businesses, and as well as engagement, recruitment, events, education. And then the planning division will receive $225,000 for a greenways study that we detailed for you during the workshop. And the total is, let me just make sure, there we go. Thank you. For support services, I have 5,609,240, and 225,000 of that actually goes to a different agency, and that's the Greenway study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there? Okay. Yeah, well, you know what, if you don't mind, can we, between, are you gonna show us what we can go through these slides, or is that part of the action items?
Part of the action. This is before you take the action item, just
Okay.
an explanation of what.
No motion.
I'll just get a consensus. Does anybody want to take a break at this point? Yes. Okay, if we can take a 10 or 15-minute break before we go to our action items? Okay, thank you. Okay, if we could start in a couple minutes. The what? No, no. All right. Oh, did I follow this guy here? Oh, okay. I didn't hear that. Really? Wow, I'd like to hear more about that. We'll talk about it. Can we go?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there's...
Let's see if we can.
You know what, the problem is, in 30 years, we're gonna be underwater, so what the hell?
Yeah, well, see, that's so you know, we get ahead of transportation. We need to get ahead of that.
Yeah, we should have a...
That's
scary
another.
thing,
That's
you know?
another funded thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, my kids were raised here, but one's in Virginia and one is in Denver now. And it's like they want to come back, but I said, oh, okay. You want to invest here? I mean, look at what happens during high tide and the water's slurping out of the storm drains.
Yeah.
And everybody's, you know.
No, the Broward Workshop is pushing hard to find a solution, and we've been meeting with state officials and county. I think there's going to be a point in time when they invest billions of dollars into it.
You know, it's like years ago. Is that Jewish?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Years ago, I worked for the city of Miami Beach, and in this Jewish thing, and I guess they used to call this thing called an Eruv, where it's like a wall or a boundary that they put around the Orthodox areas. And then one of the people on the city commission then talked about in Miami Beach that they needed to build this. It was AKA a Jewish seawall.
Yeah. The Jewish seawall.
But there is, it's Eruv, I think, like E-R-U-F or something.
Well, we're going to have to do one of those all the way around the whole region, state.
Exactly. And I'd have to go back and look at it, but I remember that conversation in the early 80s. They were already thinking about, stuff like that, like the tidal surges. And now, so when my daughter and son-in-law, I said, you really want to come back here and you're going to buy property in downtown Fort Lauderdale? And then I feel really bad as a planner. I'm telling my kid not to buy
come.
real estate in downtown Fort Lauderdale.
I think we're going to figure it out, man.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like my dad said when I was a kid. He said if we had gone with the technology of the early 1900s and projected in the future, we'd be under 6 feet of horse shit right now. You know?
Exactly. It's the speed in which the human race.
It's like how many horses per person will you have?
That's right. That's right.
And we're not.
And what happened? Henry Ford came along and changed the world.
Yeah. So he said you can't apply, at the right.
I think we run into these moments in time when we have to solve problems, and we'll figure it out. It's going to be a worldwide thing. It's not just South Florida.
Oh no, of course.
It's coastal.
Yeah, it's just we're in one of the.
We are. We're in a low-lying area.
FEMA redid all their maps.
Yeah.
A few years ago. It was pretty enlightening.
Yes, it is.
And ironically, I'm in Plantation, and they took me out of a flood zone, which I think is pretty funny.
Right.
But they're trying to minimize risk.
Right.
And they got more detailed in how they did the planning.
Right.
But because in some ways you don't want to scare everybody.
Right.
Because then they make decisions.
That's right. Exactly.
And I just figure the younger generation has to figure out what they're going to do.
I think you're going to take leads from other countries and.
Well, sure, like Lenny's super smart.
Yeah.
Super smart.
Yeah.
He and this Dr. Gerardo.
Yeah.
She's traveled all around to Durban.
Yeah.
The Netherlands.
The Netherlands are like 15 feet under sea level.
Yeah, and looking at what they've done.
Yeah, we have to apply those things.
Yeah, and get together, which they do.
Yes.
And exchange ideas.
Exactly.
Make sure that they incorporate Like
Yes.
raising these lifts?
No, I need.
Yes,
Lift stations
yes,
and things,
that's
elevate
right,
everything
that's
so
right.
they don't get flooded?
That's right.
Minimal things that,
I don't think it's gonna, I think there's gonna be poor countries that are gonna have bigger problems, where there'll be a migration away from coastal than the United States. I mean,
we'll see.
we're gonna be building seawalls
Yeah.
and pump stations.
Well, it's all about resiliency. now,
It is, that's right.
So
It's gonna be the big thing.
stand up to the storm.
Exactly. Okay, let's restart. Oh, okay. All right, cool. All right. Miss Love. Not around. Oh, jeez. Okay. Doug, you coming? All right, so got enough people here, right? We're missing Miss Love. Has anybody seen her? Okay, well, should we go ahead? Let's move on. Okay, we're going to the action items, and I think you have something, Ms. Wallace, right, to show us? Do we have to look at the,
Well,
you didn't have a slide up or something?
The first action item is actually approval of the minutes from the last meeting where you all took formal action, which was on May 23rd. I did not provide the minutes from the workshop because no formal action was taken. However, they are posted to the website at pennyfortransportation.com under our Oversight Board. The minutes from May 23rd were rather long, and again, we provided them electronically to the members, and they are posted to the pennyfortransportation.com website as part of the materials for today's meeting, if anyone would like to look at them.
Okay, we have to approve the minutes. Do we have okay, we have a second. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Okay, the next item is the revised financial audit engagement of RSM US. Gretchen, are you gonna?
I believe in April, at your April meeting, RSM came to give a short presentation about the scope of their audit. And Mr. Tablak, our Chief Financial Officer for the county, is here. He was here? Okay, he's left? Okay. And he was also at the April meeting and provided some information about how the county's single audit functions and how the separate audit of the surtax would work. And because I wanted to make sure that the revised letter, you all acted on the audit and engagement with some provisions, and you wanted some changes to the letter. And I wanted to make sure that the changes that were received were adequate to meet your direction. And so I think I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Allen.
Thank you. In your backup material that you have for today's meeting is a response from RSM basically acknowledging that the county would be, or the auditors would be auditing the county's surtax fund. But when I read it, I was concerned that the scope would not be sufficient for them to issue an opinion on the separate statement that would be produced on the surtax fund. As part of the audit process, the county has an annual audit that is opined on by the auditors. However, that opinion is based on taking those financial statements in their entirety. So the prospect of the sample that they use in determining their opinion is based on that overall set of financials. But when you then drill down to an individual fund, they need to expand the scope in order to lift those financials for that fund out of that consolidated report. And I think it's important to the board, since we are mandated by the ordinance to produce an annual report, that one of the components of that annual report to the Board of County Commissioners would be the inclusion of a separate set of financials that are issued solely on the Surtax fund. So I went back to George and asked for clarification of that, and Gretchen has submitted a updated email concurring that their scope is sufficient to issue an opinion on the separate financial statement for the fund. And I think that satisfies our requirements.
Great.
Yeah. I think the important concept here is materiality, and you kind of alluded to it, where if you come in and your materiality levels are set at the county-wide financial statement level, that doesn't make sense. So what I'm understanding that we have in front of us is this an engagement letter? So they're saying, look, we're now engaged to audit the fund, and it looks like we're going to have also notes to the specific fund, which is good. That's what we want. Okay. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what we're actually getting here, that they're gonna set this up as a separate audit engagement, or at the very least issue separate financials, which would, right, okay.
Just as they do currently for the county port, the airport,
Yep.
water and wastewater fund, those are separate statements that are signed on individually by the auditor.
Yep, okay, I'm fine with that.
The email that I just received today from George, from what I read, this is a email from RSM. From what I read, it seems to be in line with what we discussed. Your team will be preparing separate fund financial statements, just like you do for Broward County Aviation, Port, and Water and Wastewater, and we will be opining on those fund financials, and you would then have issued standalone financials of the fund.
That's good.
And I'm fine with all that. I think the one other concern I would have is as this is ongoing, what is our oversight role and interaction, and should we have some sort of, if not officially, but some sort of finance committee set up amongst our group to interact directly with the auditors, express any concerns, review a draft before it's final, all of these things?
And I would also, I think for a future item, we need to consider the ordinance envisions a performance audit. That is not something that the current county auditor or external auditor to the county provides for performance audits. We may, as a board, ask the county to engage a separate firm to do performance audits of the projects.
Even for the financial statement audit, I just want to make sure that we don't show up and then all of a sudden the audit is finalized, like just to make up an example, just that we have some interaction as they're going along. We know the status, these sorts of things. There needs to be some sort of mechanism.
I think that's needed in order to, when I supporting what we need, I think that we would need the updates, but I think it should be coming to this board as a whole, as well as the report itself and the financial report that they're going to opine on. But I also think that it should come in a draft form in the event we want to make any modifications to it. So, but I don't know that, I don't support that we need another independent component of this board to look at it first.
That's fine with me. I mean, as long as we have the steps built in to be plugged into it. I mean, I would say that even, there's normal interactions between the auditor and management, even in the planning phase. I just think we need to be kind of piped into this pretty often, that's all.
Okay, is there any other discussion on this? Are we voting on this? Okay, so.
I would suggest maybe one of the alternatives is that audit is underway, and we ask the auditors to come in and give us the plan and the status of the audit at that point in time, before it's finalized.
Has the auditors been chosen already? Okay.
It's RSM. It's the letter that was revised per Mr. Allen's comments.
The history here is that the county auditors we're deciding essentially to engage the county auditors to audit this fund separately. At least that's the way I understand it. I believe it would be, I don't know if we would be empowered to engage our own firm if we wanted to. I believe that was my understanding. I know you mentioned performance audits, but what about the financial audit? We probably could do that. But I think we said, you know, there's some efficiencies to be gained there, but, you know, there's other elements to think about too.
Is there any subcontracting component, or is this one firm just doing it and that's
No,
it?
the county, RSM has subcontractors or sub-auditors provide independent auditors assisting them.
And that goal for professional services, it's a professional service, is there that goal component embedded in there? Because I really want to make sure that we have someone, if we're engaging auditors, that they are mindful of the 30%. And I would want to know that there is an audit perspective on that.
So the existing external auditor is has a contract with the county, and so we'd have to look to see whether there were goals associated with that. But that wasn't surtax funded. The county is required under state law to have an external auditor complete a single audit of all of the funds that are that the revenues and expenditures for the county that come out of the county's overall budget that's going to be approved in September, that gets approved every year. And that includes not just the county, Broward County agencies like the port, the airport. Broward County government includes the sheriff, and the other constitutional officers that are funded out of the county's revenues. So, and what we're saying is this firm that's engaged to provide that service to the county that's required by state law would also audit this fund. And to the extent that there's specific reporting that this board wants to come out of that external audit that we have to have performed anyway, we want to understand what criteria you have that you want the external auditor to comply with, because this is something we have to do anyway, and it would be duplicative to engage a different auditor to perform the same service that's required by our external auditor, because they have to do it.
Right.
We already, I think we decided to use the county's auditor at a previous meeting, so all we've done is clarify his scope. Now this other is open for discussion later, I assume.
Correct. So yes, the approval of RSM, the county's current external. Okay.
If somebody wants to talk, could you please just head out into the hallway, please? Thank you.
So I think Ms. Pennett's question was, are there subcontracting possibilities that we could assign a goal to that particular contract? And what we're saying is that the contract has already been let, and we have to look at that contract to see whether it has existing goals. It does. Okay.
It does.
Gretchen has confirmed that it does.
To engage small businesses.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And the other question was, whether we had approved it. So this board's approval of RSM as the auditor and utilizing the existing external auditor contract was contingent upon this board being satisfied with their ability or willingness to meet the additional requirements of this board. And if this board is satisfied with the information that is received, then you would approve, just indicate it so by voting yes, that they are going to meet, they've indicated that they're going to meet your requirements and that you want to proceed with inclusion of the audit for this program in the external audit.
Right. Am I correct in my assessment that you're thinking that we should have a spot checking of the auditors? Is that what you're alluding to?
I mean, we essentially now have a separate engagement letter for this actual fund. So they're going to be auditing this fund in total, which brings down your scopes, and it's just an audit at a different level. So I think, considering we're the oversight board, yes, I think that we need to, at each phase of the audit, we need to have a contact point to make sure we understand the timeline, understand where they are, anything they're seeing in the planning. So I'm an auditor as, professionally. So talking to my clients in the planning phase, I'm talking to my clients in the fieldwork phase, and I'm talking to my clients in the wrap-up phase. So there's different phases that are going on. So for example, they're gonna have to do separate planning to audit this fund. And I'd like to know the risk that maybe they identify in the planning phase before they even go and design their procedures to go and test against those risks, as one example. So I just think that we need a continuous line of communication.
Absolutely, I agree.
But I'm sure that those procedures have already been finalized in order to meet an audit for the fiscal year ending September 30th of this year.
Potentially, so we're the auditors. No.
No.
So we need to.
So I think we're somewhat
get in front of
behind the
them.
8 ball
Right.
relative to timing. But as we proceed through this year and consider what happens in subsequent years, I think I suspect one of the problems is the auditors are engaged by the county. So therefore, their opinions are addressed to the county commissioners, not to this board. In the future, we may want to ask the board to consider making this a joint engagement for our purposes. That may be one solution rather than creating a separate audit contract just to audit this fund, because that would not be efficient from the county's perspective to just have one auditor dealing with this fund and another auditor dealing with the overall report. But I think that's for a future time, and we can see what kind of response we get from the auditors with the current audit process.
I'm fine with that. I think as an immediate kind of request, we need to know where the audit of this fund stands as of now. I mean, not immediately no, but as soon as we can figure that out, that would be helpful.
Okay, so I guess one thing we need to consider is that this fund, it just started. So the tax, the county started collecting the tax as of January 1 is when it started being assessed. And the funds are remitted to the State Department of Revenue, and then a few months later, remitted to the county. And so then the board has to budget and appropriate the funds before any of them are expended. And so the first time that was done was the supplemental budget that the board approved in May. So all we will have is the short period between May, when those funds were budgeted and appropriated, through September 30th for the 2019 fiscal year. So that's a very short period of time, but beginning October 1, for the following fiscal year, we will have a full year of revenues and expenditures, because we're now approving projects and budgeting funds for those projects. So perhaps there will be a lot more to review and audit following October 1 than there will be for the short period of the 2019 fiscal year that will be reviewed.
Yeah, from an end result perspective, I understand that. I think it's also important, though, to realize that, auditors, when they do their jobs, they may come across things, value-added comments, things that they see in relation to the internal controls. Was it set up right to begin with? Did the funds get moved when they're supposed to get moved? These things I'd like to know and ask questions, so I think we still need the interaction, but I understand your point.
Perhaps I'd just make a motion. Go ahead.
Does this engagement letter or this firm cover the municipal projects as well that the MPO will be reviewing? How does that work in future years? Is it?
Eventually.
Yes, all the Surtax funds. So the municipalities will receive funding through interlocal agreements with the county.
Right.
And so, yes, those will be subject to audit.
The same firm?
Correct. It's all part of the...
That'll have to be contractual provisions between the county and the municipality as those projects are funded, as to who performs the audit on the city projects. I don't know if the intent is for us to pass the funds to the city and the city engage the contractors, or whether the county is going to engage them and pay it, and et cetera. It may be a city project, but the money may stay within the county's system.
Right, so we'll be funding, we'll be remitting, like, for instance, the community shuttle agreements. We prepared interlocal agreements that we will utilize beginning October 1 to fund the community shuttle services that are administered by the municipalities, but it involves the county remitting payments quarterly to the municipalities for that service, not just us giving them money and them engaging someone else.
But you're actually paying for a service there.
Yes.
I mean, X number of hours of community shuttles or
Yes.
whatever, versus engaging a contractor to build a street, as an
Right.
example, is a different approach.
And
Just a quick one, the term, what is the term of the Exhibit 3, this engagement? What is the term of the
This is
engagement?
for this current, the fiscal year currently.
All right,
We-
so,
19.
okay.
Yeah. So we will have an opportunity, they're going to present again another engagement for 20, and this board would have to look at that and say, okay, right? This is just for 19, which is for that small period of May through September.
I think it's both.
I don't know what the length of the current county contract is.
So it's both years?
Oh, okay.
I know, but I wasn't sure, so you need to just check that, or we already did say
In the
they
engagement
would
letter
do it for
itself, it
20?
says it's through September of 2019, but I
Right.
believe that during their presentation, they indicated that the length of their engagement for the county, I think the length of their contract goes through 20, but I'm going to confirm that.
Okay. And so they would have an audit plan for the 19 year, but they would also have one for 20. So my suggestion is that they would come forward with their audit plan. I know they're already kind of in the 19 year, but 20 is a new year. And I would think this board should be able to take a look at their audit plan during that portion of their work. Then there's the field work portion, and then once they finish with field work, they would then come in to talk about the results of the review or the audit that they perform, which usually compiles of all of the different issues, internal controls, that type of stuff. So they should just come in doing certain key pieces of that audit process.
Do we have a motion?
I'd make a motion to accept the additional backup materials that we received today relative to the scope of the audit, to issue and opine on financial statements on the fund basis, but also to request the auditors to come to our next meeting just to give us an overview of the status of the audit and the audit plan.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Smith, did you, okay. Yes, go ahead.
I have a request in, but I'm being advised by a member of the public that's in the audience that it's Anthony Brunson.
Okay, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, passes. All right, next line item is the approval of the 2020 budget requests by statutory category. So the first category is capital.
And just as a reminder, we'll go over the, what is included in Chapter 212.055 Florida statutes, which outlines what eligible items, what the items that are eligible for funding by the surtax. So it says it can be used by the county for planning, development, construction, operations, and maintenance of roads and bridges in the county, for the planning, development, expansion, and operation and maintenance of buses and fixed guideway systems, for planning, development, construction, operation, and maintenance of on-demand transportation services. So, and what we've done is categorize them in the different, the budget request in the different categories. So the first one would be capital, and there are capital projects that we'd like you to include in a motion just to approve capital and then operations and maintenance, planning and studies, and then support services, all of which qualify under 212.055 Florida statutes.
And this is based on the spreadsheet that we were given.
Correct, based upon the spreadsheet that lists each of the different projects and the backup materials that explain what each of those line items consist of.
And do we need to do 4 different motions?
You don't have to.
Okay. All right, so I would ask, do we have a motion? This is based on
Just-
everything we talked about this morning.
These have been determined eligible, and we see that they're eligible, correct?
Correct. They've been determined eligible, and they've been approved by the county commission as a part of the transportation plan that was approved by the county commission in October of 2018.
Then I would move approval
Right.
of the FY 2020 budget request.
Right.
You got it?
Items
Four.
A, B, C, and D.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, we have a second. Do we have any discussion on the motion?
Not necessarily discussion, but just a question. The categories today were presented to us by project types. Oh, yeah, were presented to us by project type, but Public Works, Transportation, Administration, et cetera. It's presented maybe a little bit differently here in terms of capital, operations and maintenance, planning studies, et cetera. But I'm to assume that what we've discussed today is in these
Categories.
budgets has just been presented to us in a slightly different fashion.
So the way that the county does its budget is in 3 categories. That's in addendum H, I, and J. So what you'll see is that we do our budgets and our requests in 3 categories, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear to the board that the statute actually separates it into 4 categories under D, which I think Lenny just had up. So you have capital, operations, planning, and supportive services. And so we just recategorized it as the statute has categorized it because you acted that way in April, and I was trying to be consistent.
And the public works projects are capital, are all capital, and then the transit ones break it down into which are capital and which are operations and maintenance on the spreadsheet.
We have planning spread.
Right.
Okay, do we have any other discussion? It's a pretty big deal. Should we go around and just do it on a roll call? Okay. Ms. Pennant? Yay or nay? Or yes or no? Okay. Ms. Love?
Yes.
Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Mr. Kuhlman?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Cavros?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Miss Kelly?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay.
I have a question. How will projects that the county or the city didn't put into the budget be possible? This, we're looking at 30 years. There's no way everyone anticipated all these projects. So there'll be new projects, I assume, coming as new things pop up, correct?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. There are sufficient funds built into the financial plan to allow us to accommodate new projects in the future, because we all knew as we were building the plan that there would be things that we wanted to do in out years that we couldn't contemplate today. The way that those will be handled is 2 separate and distinct ways. If it's a city project that's new, it has to wait until February of 2021 under our interlocal agreement with the MPO in order for a municipality to apply for a new project. So again, for transparency purposes, I know we talked to some of you in your briefings, but for those that are watching, the MPO is primarily focused on prioritizing municipal projects that were actually in the plan that went to the voters in 2018 until February of 2021, when, based on revenue forecasts, which we'll be bringing back to you on a regular basis, if funds are sufficient, we can start to look at new projects. We can also begin to swap out projects that were in the plan that we no longer want to do for new projects. Again, looking at whether or not we have sufficient financial resources and O&M to do so. If a new project is wanted by the county, based on your direction, what we are doing right now is we're taking new projects to our Board of County Commissioners, having them approve those projects, include them in the budget recommendation, and then bring them back here for final approval. We are looking to amend the ordinance to be more efficient so that there isn't duplication of eligibility considerations. Again, right now, our board is looking at them, determining that they're eligible and that they, as a policy body, they want to do the projects, and then they're coming back here and you're looking at them for eligibility. So Angela and I have been working on an amendment for quite some time, and based on the discussions with the board in the briefings, we've determined that we will be bringing that back to you in September to workshop, to have a discussion and to allow you to review it and provide feedback before we place it on the agenda to set it for a public hearing. So you'll be seeing what we're proposing and the process, and we'll talk through the flow and just make sure that you all can buy into that.
Okay. The city has a February of 2021 before they can bring new projects. Can the county bring them? Is there any deadline or for the county?
No, as I mentioned, we are bringing new projects to the Board of County Commissioners in August. So we did not have any limitation in our interlocal agreement about the county bringing new projects, as long, again, as there was sufficient money. So when you look at that spreadsheet, you'll see that there are projects that we're pushing forward, that there are projects that we paid for with a different revenue source, so that we have sufficient revenues to be able to accommodate new projects.
Did I hear you correctly that when you said this board could bring projects to the county?
No.
I thought I heard you say that.
Wishful thinking.
I want to see what the minutes say. Verbatim translation.
Okay, all right, well, the motion has passed, so we approved the budget, which is great. The next item on the agenda is other business. There's a chair's report. I have nothing to report other than thank you all and thank staff and everybody who's participating in this. We're doing a great job. We're getting it organized. And then the attorney's report.
Thank you. Okay, there was a question that was posed by a couple of the board members at the last meeting regarding the unincorporated area of Broward County that is been dubbed the county's municipal services district, and whether it's a two-part question, whether the municipal services district is eligible for surtax funding because the county assesses taxes for services on the properties within the municipal services district, and secondly, whether the municipal services district project should be prioritized as part of the MPO process rather than included with the county projects. And so, first of all, it's like with regard to taxing, so all governments tax, and so the area within the unincorporated areas taxed for services, and then, you know, the rest of us countywide are taxed by both Broward County, the school board, the water management districts, and our municipalities, those of us who live within the municipalities, for services. So the fact that taxes are assessed for services does not preclude eligible projects from being funded by surtax funds. So as long as the project meets the requirements or the criteria in Chapter 212.055, it's eligible for surtax funding, including the municipal services district. And the other issue is, but the municipal services district, while it has that name, it is not a municipality. So Florida law, for both the Constitution and Florida statutes, define what constitutes a municipality. And the Municipal Services District doesn't. It's not a separate entity. It's not a corporate body politic the way municipalities are. It is actually governed by our Board of County Commissioners, not by a city commission. So it is a part of the county and was included. Projects within the Municipal Services District were included in the plan approved by the board as county projects. So they're going forward as county projects, not municipal ones. In the event that that somehow changes, and they're funded from the county's portion of the ledger. So the agreement between the county and the municipalities with regard to supporting the surtax that was approved last fall included a 10% guarantee of the surtax revenues for municipal projects on an annual basis, right? But the projects that are funded through that 10% are the municipal projects, and those are the ones that are ranked by the MPO, ranked and prioritized. But since the Municipal Services District projects are not part of that, on that side of the municipal side of the ledger, they're not ranked by the MPO. They are considered and processed along with the county projects. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Thank you.
It's understood, and I just want to make sure that, you know, a lot of these municipal service districts are already so disenfranchised in so many ways, and I would hope that need will supersede some of the other variables, because if their need is significant, that I would hope that the county would accordingly assess or assign resources to help strengthen those municipal service districts. They're already so disenfranchised and have nobody to lobby for them, essentially. So I would hope that we are mindful of that, how we're spending the monies in those areas.
That's good.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Our next meeting. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, if I could,
Mr.
Mr.
Allen.
Chairman. The projects are starting to get larger, and we're really getting engaged in staffing and in planning and those types of areas. Is there an opportunity someplace on the agenda in the going forward that we can have a periodic update from staff on outstanding issues that are not necessarily agenda items, but it's things like, you know, what is the status of the new hires for the staffing office? What's the status of the performance audit or the performance consultant, program performance consultant, status of the MPO process and where that's at? Are they staffed up? What is the date of those types of items to be agended so that staff can provide us with a periodic update on the status? Maybe not every meeting, but maybe quarterly or something like that.
I think that's a great idea. Okay, so there's no meeting in August. The next meeting is going to be on September 26th, and we have to determine a location. So how do you want to do that, Gretchen?
Well, you have options. We can continue to meet here, or we can meet at the governmental center, or I can try to locate a park, hopefully that has very highly functional air conditioning. I just wanted to at least offer you the options. I know that parking at the governmental center can sometimes be problematic for people, and it's a little bit easier here.
Doug would like to be as close to his house as possible.
We can never use the hearing room because they do the planning council on the same day as our meeting.
I like this location. I think this is
I'm good here too. Is this everything's good? Okay.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
so
Mr. Chair, just
yes,
before
sir.
we adjourn too, I just wanted to ask real quick, what is the process for setting the agenda? Because we do have a little bit of a time delay between now and the next meeting. I mean, one thing I want to make sure that's on there is what I brought up earlier about a process for looking at these jobs as they start to get planned, changes to the jobs, budget variances and things like this. So I think if we're meeting at the end of September, and they're really going to start spending dollars in October, right? That's the start of the October 1. We should probably have some of those things in place.
You know, I'm calling it the true up, right? So I would imagine, so we've approved the budget for 2020, right? That's been approved. So the next one's going to be 2021, and I'm sure that the staff is working on those projects and then looking at what had happened in 2020, and we should be looking at that stuff. That's, to me, that's one of the most important things, is to understand where we're going and where we've been and how it all kind of equals out. So I agree with you. I would let staff help recommend the process of when these things should happen based on what they know is going on in the different departments.
One other request, if the minutes could come out as soon as they're ready, rather than 6 or 8 weeks from now before our next meeting, it's a lot easier to read them now, correct them, and I don't want to wait till the week before if we can do that.
Okay.
I just wanted, if you would indulge me, I have a list of things for the next agenda that I'll just put out, and if there are things that I've missed, then it would be helpful for you to let me know now. I have obviously a presentation from RSM on their audit plan for both 19 and 20. The establishment of a mechanism for percentage cost change treatment for our projects. We have a revenue forecasting, so coming forward and talking about the revenue forecast both for 19 and 20.
Yep.
What is the gas tax revenue annually and how will it be utilized? An update on our communications and marketing strategy, and then the updates on the status of hiring, the MPO's process, and the just the various other consultant services that you all have already approved. Is there anything else that I missed?
I think you hit it all.
Okay.
Is that right?
Well, don't we have some projects for 20 that have yet to go to the board that need to come back to us after their
You're
action?
absolutely correct. You'll have an action item besides those discussion items.
So is she missing anything, guys and gals? Do we have anything else we need to add to that? I think that's a lot.
You know, I just want to make sure that by then, because monies would have been spent, I think, or would we have some ideas to where some of that 30% piece is going by then?
If we have any projects that have been let at that time from 2019 for on construction or planning or design that would have a goal, I will absolutely make sure that you have an update on that as well, Ms. Pennant.
Thank you.
You know, it almost would be like a little dashboard item that as projects get contracted, we could have a quick update as to what contracts have been made and who's doing them.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. World record ending.
So there's lunch in the back as well, if you'd like to help yourself to lunch.
My sister was asking me, and I have no idea. What do you mean? Our meetings are recorded.
Yeah, they're on the website.
It's being recorded on the website. Can you revisit it after?
Yeah.
Or is this, you can go back and see it again? Okay, I haven't looked.
On their website. We have our own portal.
Okay, and it shows.
I mean, if you just put in the title.
I'm sorry, but
That's your job. That's why you're here. Right? You're always here. You're stuck here because you're supposed to be doing this. I don't mind one bit.